Let's speak to David Spencer now. He's head of crime and justice at the Policy Exchange, one of the big think tanks in London. David knows of what he speaks. David, what a complete fiasco. What on earth should have happened and didn't, do you think?
Good afternoon, Peter. You're right, a fiasco is absolutely the right word for this. It is a shocking failure of operational security by the prison service. Policy Exchange earlier this year described the prison service as being in complete crisis. And one of the things that we called for was a complete clear out of the most senior levels of the prison service. And it is this sort of thing that explains why that is necessary. I understand that a pretty junior prison officer has been relieved of their duties as a result of this, but that's just not good enough. The idea that this is all down to one errant prison officer is an absolute nonsense. And we know that from the data, because the Ministry of Justice publishes every year the number of prisoners that they manage to release in error. Remarkable that there are so many of them that they actually have a data set that they publish every year on this. But what we've seen in the last year is that the number of prisoners that are released in error has doubled since the year before. So this year, or the financial year to the end of March 2025, they released in error 262 prisoners. And that is just astounding to me. So that's just not one or two mistaken junior prison officers.
And they've paid out money.
At the very top.
Yeah, and they've paid out money to people who've been kept too long as well. In some cases, thousands of pounds in compensation to people who've been kept in prison too long. So they're getting that side of it wrong as well. They're releasing people too early. Is the policy around this too complex? Because we've seen that Labour have introduced, for example, that you serve 40% of your sentence behind bars, 60% in the community, as it's called, essentially on probation, on parole. Tell us whether you think the sentencing policy is just too complicated. Are there too many calculations that these prison officers need to do? Because it's not just this guy who, I mean, that's a catastrophic screw-up, but hundreds of others.
Yeah, I'm not convinced this is about the complexity of the policy, albeit I think the idea of early release for any prisoners, or certainly the vast majority of prisoners, which happens at the moment, is ridiculous. I think that when the public hear that someone has been convicted and sentenced to a certain term in prison, they expect that those criminals should be spending that time behind bars, not being released after a third or 40% of the sentence. So I think the entire nature of the sentencing system in this country is actually based upon built on lies, frankly. When someone is sentenced to, let's say, 12 months in prison, that person should be spending 12 months in prison. But I think this case is an example all the way through of why the criminal justice system is in such trouble. First of all, this person was not supposed to be in the country in the first place. They then commit a sexual offence. They then get sent to prison for a mere 12 months, which frankly is clown-like in my view, given the seriousness of this offence. He's then released incredibly early. He's then due to be deported incredibly early in his sentence. We then managed to release him entirely, and he's still on the run. Like this case is just an example of the criminal justice system end to end completely failing the public. And what we will no doubt see, or what I would expect we will see, is an urgent question to ministers on Monday morning. I'd be surprised if we don't see that. We certainly should see it. My hope is that this individual will be back in custody by then. But what we need to hear from ministers is, number one, how this happened, and number two, who's going to take the fall for this? Because it absolutely should not be some junior prison officer. This should go right to the very top. And one of the things that I expect we'll hear, and I'll be very disappointed if we do hear it, is that, don't worry, there'll be a review. There'll be a review about all of this, and we'll work it all out. Well, yeah. I have very little faith in reviews announced by government, and the reason for that is that we are still waiting for the publication of the review into the escape by Daniel Khalif in 2023. Now, he was on bail. He was on remand awaiting trial, managed to escape from HMP Wandsworth. Like, that was 2 years ago. We're still waiting to hear. He was in the interim convicted of espionage and terrorism offences. So, this is a ridiculous set of circumstances that we've now got a sexual offender that's on the run. 2 years ago, we were allowing suspected terrorists and spies, essentially, to be released from prison. Like, what on earth is going on? And when we look at the most senior levels of the prison service or the Ministry of Justice, which is the owning department of the prison service. Now, what have we seen at the most senior levels? Well, the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Justice, not that long ago, was promoted to a much bigger department, and the Director General of the prison service has left the prison service, but has got a nice new job elsewhere in government. Like, there is simply insufficient accountability for failure within the system, and the prison service is an absolute exemplar of that taking place.
I wonder what you think of what Gary has sent in on WhatsApp. He says Labour claim they inherited the problems in the prison system from the last government, but can I point out that when in opposition they blocked or tried to block the building of extra prison capacity? For example, my local Labour MP Stephen Kinnock was a very vocal supporter of the campaign by NIMBYs in Port Talbot against the building of 1,500 capacity super prison there that led to the cancellation of the project in 2018. Something that was publicly celebrated by Mr. Kinnock. You can't behave like that in opposition and then take no responsibility for the consequences when you are in government. What do you make of that, David?
But there's simply no excuse for governments not building sufficient prison places. And we have heard that the government is planning to build an increase in prison capacity, but it is just going to take too long. And I have taken some time to be persuaded, but I'm absolutely convinced that we now need to be seeing just a lot more rapid deployment cells to increase their capacity at speed in the prison system. Like, we cannot be waiting and waiting for very large building projects to be completed. We need to look at other alternatives, and frankly, part of that is making sure we deport the right people that should be kicked out of the country in the first place.
David, thank you. That's David Spencer there, Head of Crime and Justice at Policy Exchange, one of the big think tanks in London.